our favorite historian is back. We've got Raffi here back with us. This time we're talking baseball, and you shared something about my own area that I had no idea.
That's right, and what a historical sport, by the way. So ideal connection. But here locally, Greg Maddux, a big Hall of Famer, one of my favorite pitchers growing up, was from right here in San Angelo. He was born right here. And what's really cool is that viewers can go online. You can get his documentary that just came out in the last couple of years for free. It's on both MLB.com and on YouTube. You can find it. It's an hour long. So you just type in Greg Maddux and baseball documentary. You'll see it come up. It's a great thing. He was known as the professor, of course, because he was a particularly smart pitcher who did not rely on speed like many pitchers today do and throwing it as hard as you can, but on ball placement and trying to outsmart you, which is one of the reasons baseball is so fascinating, I think, is that intellectual element of trying to outsmart each other, the kind of cat and mouse between the batter and the pitcher. So from right here in San Angelo, contributing to an all-time, baseball history. Yeah,
that is so cool. And like you said, baseball, just the game itself is so historic. It goes back, I mean, we're talking a long time ago.
About 200 years at least in the form that we know, but it goes back even further, centuries than that. Now, here's the thing. Off the top, we got to say, there's a big myth. So look, I used to work at the battlefield at Gettysburg, Civil War battlefield. Over in Gettysburg, there's a general by the name of Abner Doubleday, and I got this question all the time. Didn't he invent baseball when I was touring there? No, he did not. He was a Civil War general. But prior to that, there's a story that goes that in 1839 in Cooperstown, New York, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is, was the first ever official baseball game, and Abner Doubleday invented it. It's not a true story, very commonly repeated one, but it's not. He himself never actually claimed that he started the game either. It was something that a century later, when there was a commission put together to try to understand the origins of baseball, the story came out from a secondhand story, and it just kind of stuck. And it sounds great, too, because it's in Cooperstown, where the Hall of Fame is. It just kind of makes so much sense, but it wasn't like that. Well, it's more organic, like any game with a stick and a ball. You know, when you're a kid, even before you know what baseball is, you kind of want to play like that, right? It makes sense. In the medieval times in Europe, there are many games that have a version of a stick and a ball and going to different stations, what we might call bases now. But in the colonial America, you have the rise of cricket and another kind of English child's game, and that's how we start to get it here in America. It has a lot of relationship to cricket. In fact, in the 1840s, when we have kind of the first formalized baseball game, you see that it's related to cricket. It is compared to cricket and often shows up in manuals for cricket. Later as a baseball, a different version of it. Early games, in fact, sometimes you see on cricket fields as well on the actual manuals that they're drawing. Well,
obviously it was popular because it stuck. I mean, and of course we have the American version that we know and love nowadays. I mean, who knew there was such history?
It is. Now, here's what happens to help popularize it from there, since you mentioned the popularity. What happens from there is, of course, you have the American Civil War. And in the Civil War, your soldiers, a lot of times, they're looking to have fun. They're looking to entertain themselves when they're not in battle. They're just camping out. So they play this newer game at that point, baseball as we kind of know it. In New York, especially, and in Boston, you have two different versions of baseball that are kind of competing. And so as people get together in cities, then they're going to start to play in these ballparks, you know, what we would call ballparks, but like kind of parks in the city. Because this game that they were playing popularized with each other in the Civil War, and New York begins sort of the first official game, if you will. Look on the screen over there. What you're seeing is some old baseball cards. And the one that and often these guys came in cigarette boxes. That's what you're seeing over there. These are in the 1880s, in the early days of baseball, as we're talking about. So urbanization and the parks and the Civil War all contribute to how baseball becomes popular and eventually in New York codified into official rules, because it was organic, it was a folk game. There were all kinds of different rules, of different ways of playing it, but then it kind of gets more official in New York with some of the code being put into rule books, the diamond, the three strikes, the foul lines, these kinds of things that we're used to seeing, and that's when you start to get baseball as we know it. And then beyond that, it starts to spread across the world at the same time. And it ties back here to Texas. So believe it or not, the first game involving Latin Americans was right here in Texas. If you go down to Brownsville, there's front page newspaper coverage in the 1870s showing this, and in that, or in the 1860s, excuse me, and in that story, it talks about how they're playing against a Maramoto's team, which is a border town across from Brownsville, and those two teams, the first time that we know that we have official Latin American team participating that far back. We're talking 150 years ago, and part of the reason for that is American soldiers soldiers also played baseball in the Mexican-American War when they were down in Mexico. And a lot of the merchant class of Latin America sent sent kids as students to schools in the United States for college and such. And some of those kids were actually on that Maramoto's team. So that influence there helps it spread in Mexico. And then, of course, throughout Latin America, Cuba is one of the early countries as well. Today, in Major League Baseball, about a quarter of players are from Latin America. And so you have, obviously, a huge percentage that we're talking about.
Oh, my goodness. That is crazy. Okay, well, don't worry, folks. We're going to get more baseball history. We do have to take a quick break, but Raffi will be right back when we get back. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, we are still talking baseball because it's kind of blowing my mind how, like, the history of it and the expansion of it as well.
And international influence with Texas, of course, playing a role, as I mentioned. Now, it's funny, speaking of international, I mentioned cricket earlier. So when I was a little kid, I came across a cricket game not knowing it was a cricket game. This is live, okay, like in person. I was like, what is this weird version of baseball that they're playing? Well, I was wrong. It was cricket, right? But it looks so much like baseball in my head. That's what I was interpreting, as it shows you baseball's roots are international, yet it became a uniquely American form, the way that we talk about codified, and yet then we took it and exported it back internationally in our form, right, in Latin America, as well as Japan. Right now, of course, Shohei Ohtani is like the biggest name player in baseball, so let's talk about Japan a little bit. It goes back a long time, too, just like Latin America, 150 years plus as well. In the 1870s, there's an American professor in Tokyo that introduces the game, and it catches fire in Japan. In fact, by the 1930s, when Babe Ruth, twilight of his career, ends up part of an all-star team going over to Japan, playing a series of exhibition games against Japanese all-stars. And by then, they have Japanese all-stars because they're playing already for decades by then. And that increases the popularity even more. Shortly after that, Japan gets a professional baseball league and then multiple leagues, which to this day are considered the second best in the world. That's why a lot of times some of their best players end up coming to MLB because they can make that leap, have been doing for decades. But you know what else made it really popular that really blows my mind? A tabletop game. So there's a tabletop baseball game. In fact, I looked at it on Amazon, and there's actually now dozens of versions. So you can go get one now, and it starts in Japan in the 1950s.
Oh, my goodness.
There's a tabletop baseball game that's literally, like, it's not just a board, but it's three-dimensional. And so there's a magnet on the ball, so the ball gets pitched. You have to try to pull a knob and hit it. It's like a little, it's almost like, you know, like Hungry Hippos, but the baseball version is three-dimensional. Now you can have all these other versions that are like electronic with retracting walls and all kinds of the curved balls. And so the first ever toy advertisement to run on Japanese TV, it was in 1960, and it was for this tabletop baseball game, believe it or not. That's how popular baseball was. It remains the most popular sport in Japan today. So the American export going back internationally.
That is so crazy, and when you think about the timelines, you know, we were kind of talking about this, all the things that were happening in the Wild Wild West, the Old West, baseball was happening as well.
It was, and you know, when I think of the West, I think of cowboys having maybe a cigarette or something. So you're seeing earlier, those cigarette boxes had those baseball players on them. And think about the time period we're talking about. You know, it's before you have mass daily newspapers that are going to be, you know, having entire sports sections. Look on that one right there. You can see the cigarette label on there right there on the bottom. It says that, right? And so what you're seeing then is images of the players. You don't have a television to look at them. You might see the newspaper, but you don't have these major sports sections yet. You're seeing in the early time of being able to mass print in an easier and easier way, so they're able to do this. And then you're also going to see, just like you're used to today, you turn the card around, you see some stats. Well, you don't have the internet to just pull them up. So these cards are useful, right? Just like you're seeing right there, to see names and stats. So you can see the names on a team or the stats of a player, so that this way you can kind of keep up with your players. Now, baseball players weren't the only things that were in cigarette boxes for advertising. You might have actors and actresses. You might have U.S. presidents. You might have flags, kind of reference info and pop culture info, kinds of things you might kind of Google today. So that's the kind of stuff you would have in there, and it also helped the cigarette box be a little more stiff by having those cards in there. So it's really cool. Those cards started in the 1880s. There's a Library of Congress collection that has more than 2,000 of them from the 1880s to the 19-teens. And you can go on there today. You go to loc.gov. Some of them are digitized. And you can go start poking around and seeing some of them. That's where some of those images you saw came from. And there's more than 1,000 players with more than 13 leagues with more than 75 cities represented across both both U.S. and Canada. That's how popular baseball cars were, even well over a century ago.
That is crazy. Well, who knew cigarette boxes were the first tool, I guess.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and it becomes part of like American culture. A lot of our terminology, like it in baseball, comes from various pop culture references in U.S. history and world history. A lot of stories tell in baseball. And real quick, I brought a couple of these props here. This is a tabletop. This is a couple of baseballs I got signed when I was a kid in L.A., the Los Angeles Dodgers, by Raul Mondesi. And, of course, a bobblehead, a classic kind of baseball thing.
Everybody loves a bobblehead.
As well. That's right. That's right. And when the Dodgers moved from New York to L.A. the first time, and right field, they only had a 200-foot wall. It was too short. And so this player by the name of Wally Moon, he adjusted his swing so the balls go out to the right field because it's a shorter wall. Well, those became known as moonshots as a result of that. Today, the term moonshot still remains a high fly ball. That's how the term moonshot comes, because of the balls that the moon hit in too short of an outfield. When they played at the LA Coliseum, which still exists before Dodger Stadium existed, they didn't have enough space, so that's how it worked.
Who knew there was so much history in baseball? Oh my goodness. Raffi, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. I love it. Well, okay, if anybody wants to get a hold of him, how do you do that?
You can go to celebrityhistorian.com is where you can find me. There's my socials on there, as well as a way to get in touch, or you can go on Instagram at Celebrity Historian, or YouTube at Celebrity Historian. Either way.
He's full of fun facts. You're going to learn so much. Well, Raffi, thanks again for joining us. Of course.